Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you here. We're going to wait just a minute or two. There are a number of people who are entering the waiting room, so if you'll just be patient with us, we'll get started very shortly. And each time I say that, the waiting room seems to be closed. So I will get started. So again, welcome to today's webinar. As you can see on the screen, we're looking at student performance measures, an integral part of Act 13. And this is the fourth in a series of webinars that we're doing on Act 13 trainings. Just as a reminder for those of you who have participated previously, we'll be posting both the PowerPoint that we're using today and then recordings of all of the webinars on our Educator Effectiveness website and SAS. We do ask you to be patient with the webinar recordings because we do need to do an ADA compliance with them before they can be uploaded. So as soon as we get them and they are approved, we will be posting. So if you keep checking back, you'll be sure to find them. But the PowerPoints are posted a day or two after each of our sessions. So I'm Jean Deisel, and I work in the Bureau of Curriculum Assessment and Instruction. And I happen to have chaired the Educator Effectiveness Work Group. We had a very large group and did some very productive things, as hopefully you'll see shortly. Once again, as I call Amy Lena, she's our expert on Act 13. Amy Lena is the division chief in the Bureau of School Support, and she'll be walking you through all of what you're going to hear about today. But we also welcome, we have a really special guest with us today. Marilyn Pryl is our 2019 Teacher of the Year. And Marilyn is an administrator in the Abington Heights School District. And she's been working with us on educator effectiveness. And one of the things she did for us was to develop a student performance measure as a classroom teacher, high school English teacher, and she'll be sharing that student performance measure with you and literally walking you through it as to how it came together and the thoughtful process that ensued. So again, if we look at our next slide, you'll see that we're going to address all of the various measures, the Lea Selected Measure, which is used for the classroom teacher, Iep Goals Progress, which we will spend a great deal of time on, perhaps not necessarily today, but we know this is something in the future. What does that look like? We're going to provide you an example or two of Iep Goals Progress. And last but not least, we'll take a quick glance at principal performance goals and give you some samples. And just a reminder that these examples that we have, we've garnered or gathered from educators across the state. And what you're going to see is we're not necessarily suggesting they're perfect, but we think they're good, or maybe even quite good, actually. But there's always room for improvement. So the purpose of this today is to say, this is what it could look like, might look like. You may put your keen eye to it and indicate, not adequate for me. I think it needs more. I would do things differently. But we think providing you with the examples and the opportunity today to look at them and perhaps through the chat, provide us with some feedback will be hopefully very helpful for you. And then in our next slide, this is our stock slide for what we call office hours etiquette. Just a reminder, we would ask that you kindly drop into the chat questions or comments relevant to the topic at hand. And if you'll be patient, likely as not, we'll get to your question related to this particular topic. On the other hand, if we don't address it and it's a burning issue for you or very important, we're going to do multiple pause points along the way, so you can always drop in a question at that point. So as we move from one topic to the next, that would be your opportunity to do that. And then last but not least, if you are entering something in the chat or even not, ask that you monitor the chat. There might be something in the chat that is relevant to a question you might have had as well, and so we can avoid some redundancy. So see what's in the chat. We'll try to respond along the way in the chat. And you'll have the opportunity then to take a look. And again, you can enter additional questions if you so desire. So Amy, you're our expert, as I've described so many times. We welcome your getting started.
Thank you so much, Jean. And hello, everyone. I am Amy Lena. I am happy to be here and walk you through some of these different templates that we have and the different measures. So let's get started. I know we have a lot to cover. So we have the LEA selected measures first that I want to talk about. Minimally, the LEA selected measures account for 10% of an annual evaluation of a professional employee serving as a classroom teacher. You must utilize at least one of the measures to assess the student's performance that's listed there. You'll see 6 different options. What I like about these different options, even if you are a subject that's tested, you don't have to always use a standardized test. You can certainly reach out and do like the portfolio or the projects, and you don't have to do what we've always done and looked at this. I was a math teacher, so I know we've gone to the standardized test for my reviews, but this is really great. You can use something different. Where there's no teacher specific data available, LEA selected measures would actually comprise 20% of the teacher's annual evaluation. The use of the template is optional. However, this measure is not. It must be part of a classroom teacher's evaluation, except for TPEs. As temporary professional employees, although they may be a classroom teacher, they would not have the LEA selected measure until they become a professional employee. Also, please note that N count does not play a part in LEA selected measures. So each of our templates that we're showing you today has the next 3 areas. So I'm going to hit it one time to make sure everyone sees what the checklists that are offered in our templates. So the first part is that initial conference. So prior to that, the educator should reflect on student challenges, needs, and draft that plan of action. They bring that to that initial conference, and the educator and the supervising administrator review and revise. So this is where you have that professional conversation and decide, is this good to go, or is there some room for improvement? If the educator and supervising administrator agree upon the student performance measures and criteria, then they can then sign it and off they go into the next area. But remember, you always sign and date saying, yes, we agreed, this is our initial conference. Once that is completed, there is a midpoint review. And this can be anywhere in that, remember, it doesn't have to be a full year. It can be a partial year, a half year. So that midpoint of this student performance measure, they're going to have a review. Prior to it, this is what's really important, that educator takes the time, reflects upon what has just happened so far, and makes notes of it in part 3. Brings that to the meeting. The educator and the supervising administrator look at the initial evidence, discuss the progress. There's always going to, I would say, maybe not always, most likely there's going to be some unanticipated barrier that it needs the discussion. For instance, was there a large group of students that moved in unexpectedly? So instead of having 100, you now have 125 students you're looking at if you decide to do the whole roster. Was there something else that caused a barrier? So that's some time to create a decision, and needed, if possible, even as appropriate, change it a little bit, revise if it needs to be. Once again, once they agree and they're ready to move on, everyone signs and dates it. And then finally, at the very end of this SPM, the educator reflects again, how did it go overall since the midpoint? What did I learn? What am I taking away from it? And brings that to that end of rating review, where they discuss, again, the unanticipated barriers, the successes, the supports that might have been useful, or maybe even, should I extend this further than just this period of time? And then they sign and date it, and that's when it becomes part of the rating. So in our PowerPoint, we're going to pop out of our PowerPoint momentarily, but in our PowerPoint that's going to be uploaded to the educator effectiveness, we have this slide on here, and you'll see 4-word or 3-word and 1 PDF examples. They are for you to click on, open up, and then you have your own, these examples for you to review. During today's session, we're only going to look at 2 of them, but I did populate this with 4, so you have some other examples to look at. So let's go right into our LEA selected measure template. And you're going to find that it's exactly what I just covered. I wanted to show it to you. All these templates look the same, so I'm not going to reiterate this later, but right away you're going to have guidance. How should we use this template? Then we're going to have, just like the check marks show you, a little checklist. Did we do all these things for the initial? Did we do all these items for the midpoint review? And finally, did we do everything for the end of the year rating review? Continue on. And now I'm going to hand it over to Marilyn because she's going to walk you through the rest of this template. So thank you.
Thanks, Amy. So hi, everyone. I'm Marilyn Pryal. I am a 10th grade English teacher at Abington Heights School District in Northeastern PA. And I am temporarily like a teacher on special assignment this year working on our curriculum. But I was one of 2 teachers who were asked to be on the work group for the writing of this document. The other teacher is Joe Welch, who is a middle school social studies teacher outside Pittsburgh. So Joe and I were the 2 teachers at the table during this process, and we were so grateful to have been asked to be that teacher voice and to give that teacher input. So I'm going to talk you through this example and also tell you what Joe and I were thinking as we helped the rest of the group as we all worked together on this. So the example on this SPM is not my SPM for this year. However, it is a real life thing that happened in my classroom a few years ago. And so I thought I would use that. That would be a good thing to focus in on because I could really think through it, knowing that it happened, as I said, in real life a few years ago. So I teach 10th grade and my 10th graders always start the school year complaining about reading, saying that they don't consider themselves readers, they don't like reading. I mean, there's a couple that do, but the majority of them don't like it. Now, partially they blame this on a reading program that we used to have in our elementary grades. We no longer have it, but they say that ruined them for liking reading, et cetera, right? So this one year I decided to do something about it. Now, if this were my SPM, I could put that down as the perceived need. Students appear to dislike reading, they're uninvested, and they lack agency around reading, which is all definitely true comments that many of them make in the beginning of the year. So I could give them a survey with questions like, what was the last thing you read? What genre do you like to read? Do you consider yourself a reader, et cetera, things like that. And then I could kind of compile those results as a way to give that context or corresponding evidence that my hunch about this need is there. So a survey beginning at the beginning of the year indicated that 80% of the students, quote, dislike reading or do not consider themselves readers. So this would all be part of the evidence that contributes to the context. My proposed response would then be to give students the first 10 minutes of each class to select their own books and to read silently. Let me give a little background on this. So before this moment happened in my classroom, I actually had for about 1 or 2 years students do independent book clubs with peers of their choosing, so they could choose their friends and books of their choosing. And I thought this might address this problem that would come up every year that they say they hate reading. And what I found was they were reading the books, not in class, it was all outside, and I would set a due date for each month, but they were kind of just powering through the books the night before, and they weren't talking to each other about the books, and it wasn't helping this underlying problem. It was just another assignment to be checked off for them. So when this year rolled around, I thought, how can I, I have the book club set up, how can I spread it out even more? I had already heard from attending NCTE for some years in a row and from reading books from top people in the field like Kelly Gallagher and Pernille Ripp. I knew that this 10 minutes in the beginning of class could be transformative, right? But I had been afraid to try it for a couple of years because my classes are only 45 minutes long. So 10 minutes is a big chunk of time. However, this particular year, I decided to try it, and it was risky. I took a risk in doing that, and I had to kind of build up some courage and, plan what would happen if it worked or if it didn't work, but I did it on this year. Then the next couple of questions there ask the teacher to think about what do you have already and what do you need? So Joe and I, in contributing to this document, we really wanted teachers to reflect on their own expertise, especially. So what knowledge do I already possess? What do I already know that can contribute to solving this need? And then what would I need on top of that, right? So for me, I knew I had a classroom library that I had been working on for a few years. I had online resources because we are one-to-one, which is a huge advantage, right, in our district. And through the one-to-one, we could access Goodreads, Amazon, Libby, which is an online library, of course. I did have this information from these NCTE sessions I had attended and even other books. And then I had my own knowledge of young adult books and what students would like. So if a student didn't know what to pick, I could say, well, what do you think you might like? And we could have a conversation. So these are the things I knew I was bringing to the table. Then what would I need? Maybe more books, right? Maybe more books. So that's what I put in the need section. And then I imagined a timeline. And this is actually what took place. And ever since this year, this is kind of how it goes every year in my class. So I talk about this plan in September. I give them some time to research books. I teach them how to research books. They mostly don't know, and then we set a date to start the 10 minutes, and they're expected to kind of show up with a book either on their Chromebook or physically. So I mapped out that timeline. I thought to myself that I would have individual conferences with students. So as the whole class was reading, I would pull out one student one day, maybe another student another day. Maybe I had one in study hall later on and I knew we could talk then. And I would just sort of ask them, how's the book going? What do you think? What are some problems, if any, that you're having, etc. And I would keep notes on those conferences. And then finally, towards the end of the year, or maybe mid-year, and then towards the end of the year, I could survey them again and ask them, what did they think about this process? How was it going? In my mind, this aligned with planning and preparation, classroom environment, and instruction. And then my student performance measure written out there is, I will conference with individual students daily to check in with their progress and reactions. Students will complete a survey to measure if their attitudes toward reading or their perceptions of themselves as readers has changed. And then I checked off the student portfolios as kind of the closest match to my evidence. And then that brings us to the rubric. So this is the most, I don't want to say difficult, but this is the section of it that kind of trips people up. And everyone that I've talked to this year, teachers, even some administrators, this is the part that's most difficult. And the reason is that the whole intent behind the SPM is that this is a conversation between a teacher and an administrator. And for that conversation to take place in a genuine, meaningful way, there has to be a culture of trust there. So I think as teachers, we've been sort of maybe trained to need to check the box, and you want to check it and then you want to move on, and you don't want anyone coming back to you later saying that you didn't do something. So that's where our reliance or maybe desire for numbers comes in. Like, I predicted it would be an 8 out of 10. It's an 8 out of 10, check, let's move on, right? This is a very different approach. It requires the expertise of the teacher, the expertise of the administrator, and a very genuine conversation. And then to kind of hammer out what your teacher idea addressing the student need would look like if it was, passing versus if it was failing, if it was outstanding versus if it was just, not enough. Again, that has to be thought out. And when I wrote this up myself, I really had to think in my own mind, what would this idea look like if we knocked it out of the park? What would this be? And then kind of like, okay, well, what would it be if I just kind of did enough of it to say that I did it, right? So that would be proficient. And then what would it look like if I sort of half-heartedly tried it, but it just wasn't enough? And then what would it look like if I just didn't try at all, right? So thinking through those details was a great exercise for me. And again, it would be a great exercise, a great conversation to have with one's administrator. So let me just talk you through this. In my mind, to be distinguished at this 10 minutes of reading idea, number one, I would have to implement it faithfully. And like I said, this was a risk for me. I didn't know if I was going to have to drop content in my class. Side note, in the end, I didn't have to drop any content. So apparently this 10 minutes was just me talking about stuff, or I don't know what, but I had to do it every day, right, as I planned. I was going to take notes from the conferences to show student thinking. So that would mean I would have to follow through with the conferences, take some notes. I would have to take notes of my own observations of student behavior. There were tons of side conversations that also happened. Like I'd see a student in the hallway and they'd say, I got so excited about the book. I finished it over the weekend and now I have to start a new one, or something like that. Or a student, every year there's a student who says, I still hate reading and I'm not a reader, but I can't wait to see what happens to Johnny in the next chapter. When we get to your class tomorrow, I'm going to find out. And I would say, I hate to tell you this, but that's how readers talk, like you're becoming a reader, and they would say, no. So conversations like that would happen all the time. I would take notes on these and add them to this portfolio of evidence that I'm amassing. And that's another thing that Joe and I talked a lot about on the work group. Joe and I both are national board certified teachers, and that is done through submitting qualitative evidence, right? A portfolio, evidence of your work that is made up of artifacts, right? So we wanted to incorporate that here. And in the SPM, sure, there is still space for you to do a quantitative analysis if you wanted, but we wanted to create space for teachers who prefer this sort of results to surveys or notes from conferences, this qualitative evidence, that if you find that more meaningful, which I do. I am an English teacher, so it all sort of goes together. But to go back to the distinguished, I would have administered the surveys like I said I would, and the surveys show student reflection and growth. That does not mean that they all turn into kids that love reading, but it does mean that they reflected, and in that reflection, they grew from understanding themselves. Also in the distinguished category, the teacher performs genuine deep reflection. So Joe and I also wanted to make sure that this SPM reflected student growth and teacher growth, because the teacher growth is the part of it that's going to carry over into the following year's students, right? Because you're changing as a teacher. A proficient version of this would be that I mostly implemented the 10 minutes every day. Maybe I skipped a day here or there, but I did it. I took some notes. There were some observations. The survey was completed, right? So everything exists to say that I passed this. The teacher performs a surface level reflection. So again, enough exists to say that I did what I set out to do, and there's some evidence there of some growth. Needs improvement would be that, there just wasn't enough there, right? So maybe I sort of did the 10 minutes here and there, but not really faithfully. I took a couple notes, but nothing that really showed anything either way. The survey was incomplete, right? Or another version of needs improvement could be that I did the 10 minutes every day, but I didn't conference, I didn't jot down information. I have no idea how it affected the students. We just sort of did it every day, right? So that would be not enough to say that I was proficient. Then the last category they're failing was if I just didn't do it at all, there was no follow-up, there was nothing, I failed, right? So thinking through this, especially for me, the question of what would make me proficient in this endeavor versus what would make me distinguished, that was a really helpful exercise. And it helped me clarify what I should do, as I implemented this. So again, I'll just emphasize that really this is all about an administrator having conversations with their teachers. in a very, trustful and meaningful way, and then kind of the teacher and administrator working through that. And certainly, as Amy said before, you could take this into the following year, or in my example, if I had been doing SPMs this whole time, maybe one year I see this problem and I decide to try book clubs with peers. And then I realized they're not really reading like I was saying, or they're reading at the last minute. So then the following year I do something like this, right? So this system is meant to kind of like help the teacher think more deeply and more deeply. And I'll tell you, just to wrap up, this did happen in real life. It was probably about 5 years ago, it was one of the single most effective things I've ever implemented in my class as a teacher. And that year on the SLO, I think I probably did a pre-test and a post-test of literary terms that was totally fake and meaningless, and in hindsight, mean to do to the students, hit them with that pre-test right in the beginning of school, like, oh, I don't expect you to know this. And then at the end, voila, they all get 100 because I taught them the terms that I was supposed to teach them anyway, right? So Joe and I were really trying to get away from that and make it more meaningful for the teacher. And I knew I was having these really meaningful things happen in my classroom, but I had no way of kind of reporting them on the SLO. So the purpose of the SPM is to create the space for that kind of reflection and action in the classroom.
Thank you. Jean, do we have any questions, follow-up?
No, we do not, but I just did want to offer my thanks to Marilyn. I think you did an
Yeah.
outstanding job in sort of talking us through the process. Quite impressive. Thank you, Marilyn.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to do it. And I'm going to put my email in the chat there. If anyone wants to follow up more with me about that, I'm obviously very passionate about talking about it because it's about teacher autonomy and teacher professionalism and teacher expertise. So I'm happy to talk more if you'd like that. But thanks, Jean, and thanks, Amy.
Yeah, I thank you so much. I really feel like you help us clear up what this shift is and how we don't have to do just that, exactly what you said. I'm just going to give a test to give a test. So, I mean, there are meaningful times where you're saying, I'm going to implement something and it will involve a pre and post test. Right. Absolutely. But this also gives you a new look and a new feel, and much more meaningful. So thank you so much for taking time and coming today. It was wonderful.
You're welcome. Thanks.
See ya. So I want to show you another example, and we had someone share it with us. And once again, we're in our first year, but I think it holds some merit into a different example of what we could see in this SPM. So this is a middle school science example. My students' need is centered around improving their ability to connect different energy types through transformation, allow students to increase their identification of energy outside the classroom and how it flows through the environment. One thing I did want to point out about this template, you'll see that it says weighting of 100%. That is because if there were some reason that someone wanted to have more than one goal, they could set it and say what percentage of this piece of the pie, if you think of your evaluation as that circle graph, that this could be 50-50, 60-40. So this one is only one goal and it's 100%. This teacher is going to give a pre-assessment, to find out that in background knowledge, and obviously based on previously taught standards, and see where their skills, if they're proficient or maybe not so much among the student population. The proposed response is to then implement hands-on lab experiences and projects which allow for student discovery and collaboration with peers. It's going to allow the students to make connections to real-life experiences. The resources available to this teacher and to this class, 20 hands-on energy transformation stations and student choice projects. They're also looking at textbooks and CK-12 online resources. He also lists some additional resources here that are available. You can see here the timeline. Remember, it doesn't have to be a full year, so it's going to be over this unit. Give students a pre-assessment, perform energy transformation demonstrations with students, and then give that post-assessment /test for the energy unit. This teacher marked the domains that align are the planning and preparation and instruction. This next part, I'm going to ask you to provide some feedback for us. We have first here that student performance measure. The teacher lists that there's a pre-assessment consists of 14 multiple choice questions given to students before the start of this unit. If you were the evaluator and having this conversation with the administrator, having the conversation with this educator, do you think this is appropriate, or would you want more? Or what are your feelings about what they've listed for the student performance measure? If anyone can share in the chat. Any thoughts, like, is this appropriate? Is this what you were, is there anything else needed?
Well, Amy, this is Jean. Obviously, you and I saw this prior to this session right now, but my wonder is, one of the things I was thinking about is it looks like that pre-assessment is going to be administered mid-year and then end of year. It's not worded quite the way I'd like to see it, but that's unimportant at this point. But my point might be, if they're not seeing significant growth at mid-year, I might want to have something in here that says, if they're not showing the anticipated growth mid-year, is there something that will be done to move it forward, rather than, oh gee, they haven't made progress and okay, we'll get to the end of the year and not so hot. And Jillian says, for example, I'm wondering what they're measuring. It's a little bit maybe vague. And, is it a skill? Is it a standard? And Alana says, this is just one unit. So I think probably what we're all saying, it lacks, it's not very explicit. We're not exactly sure what we're honing in on. And it looks like it's just a unit. And that's a good point as well. Is our SPM that small that we're looking at a unit? Now, maybe the unit's 18 weeks. I mean, we don't know. But I think it just lacks some detail that would make it a fine student performance measure for me.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the other comments. It's true, like what is being measured? I think that's a really good point. And also my wonder was, when they mentioned the timeline of post-assessment, was the post-assessment exactly the same questions as the pre-assessment that's listed here? I was wondering that as well, like so I know some people do that to gauge growth. So that was also my question. Then we just, additionally, if you don't mind sharing some thoughts, here's how they're wanting to be evaluated. So they just simply put distinguished as 90 to 100, proficient 80 to 89, needs improvement 60 to 79, and failing 0 to 69. Students fail the assessment at the end of the unit and retain no information related to energy. Any thoughts on the evaluation piece? Because I wonder, along Jean's line, I wonder, like, what do these percentages represent, since there is a pre-assessment?
Jillian says something which is also an interesting bit of conversation, because she says there's no reference to teacher growth. And I'll let you comment on that, and I'll give you the next comment, Amy. She says, Alana says, I'm still unclear as to what we're measuring.
Okay, so, right. So technically, I mean, we want to focus on the student growth since it is a student performance measure, but I really like Marilyn's take on that and how this can be shifted with the student performance. We have to make sure we align to that. But exactly what she said, it is helpful if the teacher puts some type of growth in there so they can take it to the next level and impact students for future years. So I really like how she added that, and I agree with that. Correct, we don't know what we're measuring, Alana. That is exactly what I'm feeling. I'm also thinking distinguish, what if they get a 90 on the pre-test? Is that what that means? Or is that the post-test? Or what if they get a 90 and a 90? Is that showing growth? So that is, my question as well. Like, where is this showing any growth? And that's why I wanted to bring this to you, because we wanted you to start thinking and saying, here's another example, it's modeled off the SLO for sure, but is there room to be adding more? And I feel like that's what we're hearing. Is that what you're thinking, Jean?
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to say here is, as I think we said at the very beginning, these are examples that have come to us. You read or listened to Marilyn, who gave an outstanding presentation on what it should be or could be. And then you have this other piece that says, maybe it's a good start, but it needs more work. I
Yep.
think that's part of my thinking as well. There's something of value here, but it is not well stated. And Alana, as a former science teacher, says, I think it's poorly written. There are so many things we can measure. It needs more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I want to show you too. So here's the midpoint reflection. I administered the pre-assessment before introducing content. Here's the median. And my pre-assessment shows students clearly need improvement in practice. So at the midpoint, I'm thinking, my question is, and you certainly can add into the chat what you're thinking. My thinking is that they should be a little bit further and maybe some more reflection, like how are the hands-on activities going? He said something about student choice projects. Are they even diving into those yet? Where are they beyond just the pre-assessment at this point, if it's midpoint? So that's what we want to show you another example, because it's just good to see different selected measures that are out there. Okay, our next area is the Iep Goals Progress, and I want to set this up for those of you that haven't joined us before. Chapter 19 does say, regardless of the certification area, all classroom teachers shall be accountable for student progress toward Iep goals. The Iep Goals Progress measure is required under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act if, and we will dive into this in the office hours more, but I just wanted to set the stage, if these next pieces are accounted for. So if the teacher provides instruction to a sufficient number, meaning you're going to meet that end count, and we'll talk about end count in a minute. And the other part is, are those students that have IEP goals, do they have similar academic or non-academic, meaning behavioral IEP goals to which the teacher contributes data? So did I meet the end count, and am I a teacher who's contributing data? Okay, what about that end count? This can get tricky, so I want to make sure I'm going to try to explain it slowly, and we can definitely, like I said, go into more detail at another time. The end count must be set, and the law says the maximum at 11, but I'm finding that's confusing, so I reworded it to be must be set less than or equal to 11, meaning that the teacher has 11 or less, whatever your end count is. Let's say my end count's 11. The teacher has 11 or more students that have the IEP goal. If the LEA decides that the end count is 5, then we look at the IEP goals. Are they similar? I have to have 5 or more students that have the same goal. So it's whatever the LEA sets it at, and the LEA cannot set it past 11. Then we have active versus actual. So if I'm a math teacher, a secondary math teacher, and amongst all my whole roster, then I'm going to say, what are my IEP goals? Oh, I do. I have 12 students that have this similar goal. And so if my LEA must choose the end count and then choose the active or actual. So my LEA says, we're going to go by the actual number. Okay, I have 12. Therefore, I qualify for an Iep Goals Progress measure. If the LEA says, no, we've selected that everyone's going to go by active end count. Now I start looking at the data and say, what percentage am I responsible for as the math teacher? Well, I know that myself and 3 other teachers are contributing data. I'm responsible for 25%. So I take 12 times 25, which equals 3. I no longer meet the N count. So these are LEA decisions. What is the N count, and are you using active or actual? The N count is applied to a grade level cohort. So if I'm a 10th grade English teacher, to my whole correlate to all students within a subject area. So if I teach math, I teach algebra, I teach geometry and algebra 2, it'd be all of my whole roster. Okay, so that rather than just that single class or single course. So just like we did for the LEA selected measures, we have a slide, and anytime you see the word or a PDF, that's an attachment for you to open and look at the example. So I'm going to pull it up here and show you. The template's the same. It has that initial midpoint, end of review, end of the time frame review. So that's all there. I'm going to jump right to this. This is a behavioral IEP goal. So we have coming to class prepared with 80% of the identified materials for 10 consecutive days. So why are we doing this? What's the current context? Well, I have 12 students who do not bring materials to class regularly, meaning they're unprepared, we're learning loss, right? Because as I'm teaching, they're at their locker, or if the elementary, they're at their cubby. They're missing the content, or they're missing the content because they don't have the materials in front of them, even if I don't let them go. Achievement gaps are being impacted, even for the non-IEP students, because I'm losing that transition time. Too busy saying, get your stuff out. Oh no, go to your locker. I'm losing that time. So that's why it's lost there. So what is the proposed response? Well, I'm going to take a collective response by incorporating routines and rituals that will facilitate student preparedness. I'm going to meet with the special ed teachers and the staff. I'm going to have protocols to be consistent, including a daily checklist. Did you bring everything? Here's what my resources are. Obviously, I have the special ed staff, which of course is invaluable. I have family communication, I have daily checklists, and I have resources to learn more about it. This teacher has said, can I also go to a professional development? That would be really helpful. Here's the timeline. I'm going to have it up here for you to read. I'm just going to summarize. We want to meet with the special ed teacher in the beginning of the year and continue it on a monthly basis. We have checklists. We want to reinforce. We want to make sure we're giving that positive reinforcement, which always helps. Reminding, encouraging. Remember, tomorrow, same thing. I want to see you tomorrow with all your stuff ready to go. And then obviously always important is that reflection. What is working? What isn't? Should I change course to help this work? Here are the domain alignments. A majority of my IEP students will come prepared for 10 days, 80% of the materials, 10 days in a row. And then we go, what artifacts? The daily checklist will show that. We have distinguished and proficient here. I can't get it all to fit, but so remember, it's easy for me. The way I think is it works easier for me to start with proficient. What is just my goal? All right, my goal is the majority of them will come prepared. What if I exceed it? Well, now all 12 of them are coming. That's distinguished. I have now exceeded my goal. All 12 of them are coming. Ready to go with their checklist, they're prepared, and they're following the routines that I set. Needs improvement, a majority of them are coming, do not meet it, they're not really ready, it's taking longer than I thought, and obviously there's no evidence of me failing. So that is a quick example of the Iep Goals Progress, and like I said, we will dive into this coming up. We wanted to make sure you saw an example, and behavioral seems to be the most common, so we wanted to touch upon that. Questions, Jean, on IEPs?
Nothing in the chat, Amy. Thank you.
Okay, good. We have time to hit our last one, which we haven't touched upon yet in other ones, is the principal performance goals. So account for 20% of the evaluation of professional employees and temporary professional employees serving in principal roles. So this is going to be, remember, temporary professional teachers, they're always 100% observation practice. If a new principal begins, they're still responsible to have that 20% performance goals. Who is a principal? It's the building principal, assistant and vice principals, the director of career and tech, and new to Act 13 is the supervisor of special ed. You may label their title differently. You want to look at their job description. Are they really just overseeing special ed? Then that's who we're talking about. Must be developed before the beginning of each school year by the employee and their supervising administrator. Goals may be district specific or building specific, and maybe both. This is an area where I definitely see more than one goal being written. I know when I was a principal, I definitely had a district goal and a school goal. So this is where you may see more than one goal. This template is customizable. It's designed to facilitate this participation and the conversation between the principal and their evaluator. So as we do with the other ones, we have a slide devoted to showing you the examples, and you'll see the Word doc icons. There's an elementary example and a secondary example. So let me pull up our elementary example. So although it says weighted 100%, most likely this principal has another goal. So maybe this is 70% weighted, and then the district goal is 30%. It depends on, what they've decided. But I put 100% just for this example, but most likely there's going to be, I know this principal had 2 goals. Develop and implement a school-wide math focus through the Professional Development Committee. Why? So although we haven't had PVOS growth coming to our school, we know the historic, the history of what's going on with PVOS, and we know it's been low in our school for 5th graders. We're not seeing those high achievers growing more. We're also noticing that when we did have those achievement scores, we noticed that math continued to score lower than our ELA. We also can pull that data to show that it's still occurring from our local assessments. So although we haven't had PSSAs in the last couple of years, we haven't been getting that data, we can look at our local assessments and say, yep, it's still happening. Also in our school, we've been really focused on grades 3 through 5 because that's the tested areas. But now we really need to make it and have it K to 5 because that K1-2 is building the math that we need for later on. So we're going to make sure it's a building-wide goal. Here are some resources we have. Why not use the people that are right there to help us, the supervisor of math, or if you have a department chair, the IU math specialist would be a great person to reach out to and say, hey, can you help us with some professional development? And then what does it look like for the year? We really want to talk math. That's what we want to do. So we want to model. So in a faculty meeting, showing everyone what is modeling, what does math talk look like? Then having productive group work, collaborative discussion, so they can say, how does this apply to my grade level? What's it going to look like in my classroom? How do we ask questions? Instead of saying 3 + 4, what is the answer to that? No, let's dig deeper. What's a different type of question I can ask? And then what type of assessments, rather than that standard test we're used to, look at that formative assessments. Are we having the kids draw the math, showing their thinking? And then finally, some really fun activity at the end, make it exciting. Math is fun. We have Week of Inspirational Math, and there's some really great assemblies out there that you can bring in. And systems leadership for learning is what was chosen. How are they going to have this evidence? They're going to do pre-assessments, post-assessments. They don't have to be standard tests. They can be a portfolio as well, showing that any type of assessment. They're also going to use local data and benchmarking, and eventually probably, I assume, the PSSAs. They're hoping for the scores to improve. So far, this is not completed, but they have the proficient part completed, that the majority of the students in all grade levels show improvement through benchmarking and pre and post assessments. So what does that look like? What do they really want for improvement? What's the baseline and where did they grow? That is the elementary example. The secondary example we have, I want to get some input on here from you. This is a brand new assistant principal who walked into a building that was now configured differently. So collaborate with high school principals to create and implement procedures for a new building. That means we have to build the culture of the students, staff, management, leadership. What do they have? They have leadership books, committees, research of how other schools have handled these changes. So reaching out to their colleagues. So this is the specific actions: training of the new office staff, aligning the grade level staff for consistency, creating a new option for upperclassmen. They're also bringing back special moments for students. Remember, as you know, I don't say remember, as you know, schools have looked differently the past years. They want to bring some of that culture back, and how can they do it safely? And meet with staff on a consistent basis to ensure they're feeling supported. So my question is there anything else they could add, or do you see anything missing, or what would proficient look like? What are there any wonders that you have, any questions you have on this performance goal?
It's been a long day, Amy.
I know, it's the end of the day. So that's fine, but this is kind of just to get you started, to start thinking, what are some goals that I could have? So we don't have, for proficient here, they could, one of the ideas they said is to conduct those surveys. So did they see improvement? Were they able to track the events, and were they able to say kids are now coming back to events? So that's something they could evaluate and be proficient for. So we want to make sure we advertise that in a couple of weeks, we have the rating tool for educators. Categories will be reviewed. And we want to invite you to February 22nd at 12 and February 23rd at 3. We hope you can attend. And as always, we have our educator effectiveness site on SAS that we definitely want you to go to, that one-stop shop. And you can also reach out through the RA to me, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And I can answer questions now because we have some time. And I see, I agree, Alana, thank you. And for saying, yeah, I want to see dates broken down further. Say you're working on it for a whole year, doesn't show you're going to work on it over the year. I agree that that would be very key. So good point.
Amy, there is another question, which is really a good one from Steve Elliott. Can a teacher do the same SPN 2 years in a row?
That is going to be the discussion for the teacher and the evaluator. So Marilyn was talking, she's like, I would like to do this a second year as an SPM because I now have a new group of students. Was it student specific? What can I do? There's still room to grow. So what am I going to add to this year, or maybe make a look, feel, reflect what I did, what didn't work, and say, can I make that tweak? So I definitely think it's a possibility as long as the conversation's there and everyone agrees on it, because you have a new group of students. Now I want to make it better. And that's something you should try.
Actually, nothing more in the chat.
We know it's been a long day, a long week. It's only Wednesday, I know. But we so thank you for coming and spending your hour with us. We're here to help you, and we're going to continue these office hours so that we're here to make sure that we're answering your questions and providing the resources you need.